Let me start with a question. How do you balance building a relationship with a potential donor and then making an ask? So, those are two key areas that need to be worked on well. Well, welcome to the podcast. My name is Dr. Randy Dirks, and this is Funding Your Future Now podcast. It's designed for people in the nonprofit world, whether they be presidents or executive leaders or on the front line raising funds. And its purpose is to give practical insights into daily living so that we can see our nonprofits grow and excel in their impact in every way. So today it's my delight to welcome as my guest John Roberts. And John has a variety of background experiences. And the one I just want to relate to the most is he's the co-founder of the Fundraisers Collective. He'll tell a little bit more what that is, but it's a community for fundraisers who want to build healthier, more sustainable organizations. So, John, I love that venture that you have there. So why don't you just take a few moments, introduce yourself, and maybe talk a little bit more about the things you do.
Fantastic. Well, thanks, Randy, and it's great to be on the podcast and to chat with you today. My background, I'm a fundraiser. That was my first thing I've done the last 16 years. I started off as a college student where I had a dream to work with some young boys I met at the local high school there, and we started an open gym program in which I partnered with a nonprofit thinking they would help fund that. I didn't quite understand that meant I was doing the fundraising.
Yeah.
I thought I brought them a great program for them to talk about. And so that's how I started in fundraising. I spent the first 6 years in that small shop space and then moved from Chicago to Grand Rapids, where I continued working as a small shop fundraiser. I was a solo development director working alongside the board, alongside a founder. And then I did one small stint where I worked on a large team. It was 4 years doing major gift work on a larger team. And then I went back to small shop fundraising. So 16 years, primarily small shop fundraising, and just really loved that element being more relational. And so that was a big piece for me. And the last almost year now, taking that enjoyment for small shop fundraising and local grassroots nonprofits. And second is my passion for people, relationships, and community. Going, how do I bring all this together in this chapter of
Mhm.
life? I'm a dad of three boys and married the last 13 years now. And so my wife and I is how do we incorporate our family and community into all that we do? And so this was a great fit with the Fundraisers Collective and building out a space for fundraisers to collaborate, to grow, and to learn so we can all be more effective fundraisers and our communities can thrive because of it.
I love what you're doing. You're just adding value, you're giving back based upon the experiences you've had. So I've got a few questions for you, John. And as you've shared, you were the sort of the first hire, and at least in a few of the organizations you worked at. And what does it actually look to build a fundraising team from scratch? So what do you think a nonprofit president should do, or what should they know before they make that first hire?
Absolutely. What a great question. Looking back on my experience, I think there's some funny conversations you get into sometimes as that first person coming in. Usually it's with a board member who maybe speaks their mind a little more clear than sometimes the executive director or founder might guard and not say something. But a comment I heard at least three different times, different orgs, was about being a rainmaker. And that's not to say, oh, I came in and I was a rainmaker or I wasn't, but more the fact that there was this assumption that we're going to bring in someone to just make it rain money. And I want to stress that, I mean, hopefully, yeah, hopefully you're great in your fundraising, but I want to stress that's not the biggest thing, especially at the beginning. That's not the most important thing to look for from my perspective, because frankly, when you bring in that first development director or even first fundraising staff, you got to think infrastructure, you got to think systems,
Yeah.
workflows, and processes that really get you to go the future. And along the way, there should be really strong major gift work and other pieces too. But if you don't have these frameworks and systems that you're building, then it just is going to fall apart once that development director moves on or the board or the ED finds a new person. Well, those donors might fall by the wayside if there's not a good framework to keep them in place. You
Yeah.
didn't build up anything, didn't store notes in a CRM.
So critical to have that well thought through rather than just sort of shoot from the hip and suffer some of those negative consequences for everybody.
Correct.
Second question, you say that relationship comes before revenue, and I really love that frame of reference. Can you walk us through maybe a specific moment where prioritizing the relationship over the ask, so starting with that relationship first, actually maybe led to a bigger outcome than maybe you even expected would have happened?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Yeah, I could think of one example I bring up specifically. This was almost 10 years ago now. I still get together with this gentleman almost at least twice a year now. And we
Okay.
don't generally do fundraising stuff together. I'm at a different organization. He's still plugged into that nonprofit. But the interesting part is he came out for a tour, and I had never met him before. The founder had a small friendship with this gentleman and just told me enough about him. And we just walked the property. We saw the org, what
Mhm.
was going on, and got to understand him and spend time learning about his business, what his values were, and what
Mhm.
the connections were. At the end of the time, being a business owner, he came very straightforward. He had a plan. He knew what he wanted to do, and when we were talking about how he could get involved, he already had mapped and thought that whole thing out,
Okay.
except there was a little bit of a problem. The problem was the organization, we weren't ready to add some new program on, even if he was going to fully fund it in that first year. That wasn't something that was going to be our priority. And
Right.
so that's a tricky place to be in. And I think you could probably do a coin flip on how organizations decide what to do with that major gift like that.
For sure.
But what me and the founder ended up doing and what our discussions was, we invited him to be involved, to plug in and to experience it, but we actually didn't launch that new program right then. It was a workforce development type idea. But instead, we took that idea, kind of used it as a springboard in one of the home units. So this was a residential home for boys. And so one of the homes, we plugged him in that house, coming out to talk with the boys, sharing his business, being able to
Mm.
spend time with them. And the idea was wanting to kind of align his values and his passion with us, but also not push the org beyond where we could really sustain financially at that point in time.
Sure.
And so him being plugged in with that, he just fell in love with these young boys
Mm.
and just
Mm.
with what the work was going on and trying to think how he can help in every which way. And so it just created that passion that there was already an interest alignment, but was able to take it and create that passion for this specific organization that's gone the distance, over 10 years now that he's been involved there. And so that was putting, I think, the relationship and the organization, I would say both first before the dollar. The dollar followed, and yeah, we could have got that big gift that first year. But what if we didn't continue that program and it just ended there?
Yeah.
That's the part that I think we need to think through as nonprofits sometimes with the gifts that we might be getting.
Oh, that's so insightful, John. I like the idea that you engage that prospective donor actually in the ministry itself. I think so
Mm.
often it's just sit down, have a conversation, put a written proposal in front of somebody, and say, "Can I get back to you in a week and get your response and pick up the check?" And I know there's more than simply that, but once you start engaging somebody in an actual, practical, hands-on, in this case, speak to the boys, see what their life is like. As you said, that began to birth within him so much deeper awareness, understanding. And if I'm understanding correctly, that person has stayed on in the organization over these 10 years. Great story. I love it. Well, you've raised funds for a lot of different organizations. It's foster youth, homelessness, food success. They're really very different in some ways in the sense of donor pools who would be responsive to those kinds of needs. Maybe if you could articulate one principle in donor engagement that perhaps is transferable across some different platforms. I know we have to be sensitive and understand there's different ways, but is there something that sort of threads through the organizations you've been involved in?
Yeah, great question, Randy. When I think about that, like, it's interesting when you make that point, these organizations being so different, right? Is that, from the first organization with youth, then residential, being over with homeless organization, workforce development, then food. And now I do fractional at a community hub where there's 20 different nonprofits in there. They are really different, but there's a common thread for me and my interest is that grassroots social service. What are the critical needs someone needs just to hit the ground floor, to have a roof over their head and food. So for
Right.
me, there's that. But the donor, that's not always the case for them, right? So those donors and those relationships, that one donor I mentioned, we still get together twice a year.
Mm.
I think only one time since I left that organization have I actually asked him for a gift for a different org, and it's because he had a business alignment that made sense. And it's
Yeah.
not because I wouldn't like him to give. It's just I know he's found the place that matters to him, that he belongs and he's into it. and he knows the other things I'm doing. Is that right or wrong? I don't know. Time will tell. What I think is important, that common thread, I believe in donor engagement, is belonging and
Mhm.
finding that alignment with the donor of where do they belong? What are the values? What matters to them? And do we see that alignment with the org that we're at, right? Is this going to be an alignment? For example, that gentleman there really cared about workforce development, young boys, and finding that opportunity. That was his spot. At an organization I went at later, the one time I approached him was a workforce development program that made perfect sense. So that finding that alignment with someone, that's crucial. And when you meet that donor, even at an event, the first things I'm doing is just curiosity. I think that's the common thread as well, is when you meet
Sure.
someone somewhere, asking great questions. And by
Mhm.
great, I mean ones that give you a lot of insight into the other person. So you can learn, who are they? What do they do? And what do they care about? At least those three. There's a plethora of other questions, but
Sure.
that's the important stuff.
Curiosity. You hit the curiosity killed the cat. Well, curiosity, you really nailed the main thing that needs to define us as fundraising executives. To begin with, and I love you to speak into this, it's much more about the other person than it is about our organization. And I think sometimes there can be a tendency, and we have to be very guarded about it, that we don't come and fairly soon in the conversation start talking about we. We did this,
Mhm.
we accomplished that, this is who we are, this is our history, this is all the impact we're making. There's a spot for that, no doubt. But to begin conversations, like you said, with curiosity, you gave three categories of questions. Maybe you could just give those again and amplify on them a bit.
Yeah, no, great question, Rand. I think the curiosity is what we lean in on, right? Is those three questions, is who is that person? Getting to know who they are. And a piece of that who is the what. What do they do? Because that defines our time. You look at someone's calendar, that'll tell you some of the things they care about. So what do
Mhm,
they do? And the third thing there was looking at is, what are the things that they're excited about? What are they passionate about?
mhm.
And you can ask the question differently. And don't literally go down that line, but what you're drawing out is those pieces because you're trying to see what are the things they really care about and how does it connect, if it even does. Sometimes it might not connect, and that invitation might be, I'm going to this thing next week with a totally different nonprofit and inviting them along to check out, an organization in domestic abuse. Maybe that's important to them. It's
Sure,
not what your organization does, but now you just established that trust.
right.
So maybe there'll be something along the line, or they'll bring a friend along to your org later and introduce you to somebody.
Yeah, that's so good. Well, in addition to being involved in several nonprofits, you also have started a for-profit venture. How has been thinking like an entrepreneur changed the way you approach fundraising? And maybe what can development professionals learn from just being in the business world the way you have?
Yeah, good question. I think the first one that comes to mind is a frictionless experience. And what I
Mm,
mean by that, and I know we didn't share it at the beginning, I have a self storage business as well, that I
okay.
do very different from the fundraising space. And it's been open almost, it'll be 3 years this September. And then, in addition to the Fundraisers Collective you mentioned, which is a brand new venture of how do we bring those fundraisers together. But in both of those, the piece that I take back is that frictionless experience. The easiest way to think about that is when a donor goes on your website. I think this is the one we all can connect to, whether you're in business, nonprofit, you're a board member. When you click on a nonprofit and you want to donate, what's that process like? One, and then what happens after that gift is made? So what's the follow up there? And so what I think about there is when I go on a website, if I'm thinking as a donor and I'm wanting to click to give, okay, what popped up on there and how many times did I have to keep entering until my donation's submitted?
Yep.
And then after that, what type of follow up happened? And that's something where I think we can all reevaluate. I need to reevaluate all the time,
Yeah.
is not just that automatic thank you or that tax receipt. And some orgs these days aren't even sending the tax receipts anymore, until maybe year end at best. But thinking about what's the personal connection? Did you send an email to them? Did I give you a phone call? What communication patterns? And so that's the frictionless experience I mean, is so that when you give, you're seeing that immediate impact and you're getting connected with them, regardless if you gave a $25 a month or that $1,000 gift. I think there needs to be some type of experience for everyone, especially with technology in a modern age now.
I love that term frictionless approach to the whole process. And, when you start thinking about a fundraising executive or president, building a connection and relationship with a donor. It's like any relationship we have, whether it would be with a child or a friend or the person you married before in a dating process. There was things you did to build that relationship. And so in a similar way, to be thinking creatively, maybe out of the box, how do I cultivate a long-term meaningful relationship with this particular person? And that may, we want to be careful the kinds of things we get involved in, but that may mean, if they're open to it, attending some things that they enjoy going to and just hanging out and appreciating who they are, enjoying a barbecue, inviting them over for,
Mhm.
don't talk about business, but those kind of avenues give an opportunity to, I think, go much deeper in understanding what they value, what's important to them. So I love that a particular approach. Well, I've got some quick questions here at the end as we wind things down. They have nothing to do with your storage facility or your nonprofit or your for-profit, but more with you as a person. And here's the first question. What would be a great piece of professional advice that you've received in your past?
The most important one that I've received that I can use is one, it's simple, straightforward. I need something I can write on a sticky note, that
Yeah.
easy. And it's listen more than you speak.
Mm.
And there's thousands of places all over the internet that talk about that, I'm sure, and things that I've seen too. But that's really important. And in the donor world and in our nonprofit space, in the business space, in friendships, and in marriage, it's something you can take across every walk of life.
Yeah, absolutely. So good. Second question. What's a daily habit you cannot live without?
This one's a little more new to me. I used to joke about being a night owl. I wanted to stay up late. I found that I couldn't get up early and I'd wake up on time for work, but my morning routine was wake up, jump in the shower, throw on the clothes I set out the night before, go out the door. And what it turned into the last 2 years is slowing that down, especially in the morning, starting the day off with some type of routine. For me, that's a time where I walk the dog. One, the dog needs to go out, but more importantly, I need time of just like quiet, no AirPods in, no music, just a peaceful start to my day of a walk. Whether you're a faith person, you can add prayer in there. There's things you could do with that. But either way, the second piece of that is reading, having
Mhm.
some type of reading or note taking, something in the morning just to start you off before you even get to your food and everything you're doing. At least for me, that's the things I found important. Maybe in 2 years, I'll add in a workout routine or something.
Okay. Yeah, work into the workout. Next question is, what would you say would be, if you could go back, put it this way, if you could go back to your 20-year-old self and give yourself some advice, what would that be?
Hmm. Well, I guess I can't tell them to pick certain stocks or Bitcoin or something like that. That'd probably be the best advice. But besides that, the one I would say it's kind of probably a little more comical, but I would tell myself to buckle up. There were some hard years in life. My
Mhm.
wife and I, we went through some really tough medical years
Okay.
specifically, and so that shaped for me a lot of my decisions at this stage of life. At that phase, it was a lot more of determining some of my work, but that's what led me a little more into the entrepreneurship side, is to go, how do you support a family amidst different situations? And that's what led down that road. And also, when you're going down that road of some adversity and some challenges, is who's around you, who's your community of people you can rely on. And so, being able to take those two areas, I think that's really shaped who I am and what I do today.
Yeah, sounds so good. Well, think about an area, we could classify it maybe as a failure or a disappointment or regret, but it actually set you up for greater success. What would that be?
I think the first that comes to mind, I think because my mind just went there and got stuck there on the last question, I was thinking 10 years ago now. And so we were in Chicago, take you back to that point. We're in Chicago and running this organization in partnership with a national nonprofit. And it's kind of been my baby, my brainchild, the thing that I created in college and led for 6 years. And in some respects, it was flourishing, but in others, it wasn't. I was burned out. I was emotionally spent. I was working multiple side type of jobs, from teaching at the local high school, 2 classes a week, to driving for Uber and Lyft, and trying to just kind of make things work as a young professional who's married. My wife and I were fostering two youth. And so we had all these things that we were doing kind of in nonprofit ministry type work that were amazing, but also we were sacrificing all of our time and everything. We had no boundaries really built up, and we didn't have an infrastructure to kind of help support us. And so through that burnout and through that period, that's ultimately some of what led us to come to Michigan 10 years ago now. And that really shaped us up to kind of think through how do we set up a life to support it. We weren't even aware of the medical challenges we were going to face the very next year, but that was something that for us and for me specifically, that failure and that challenge of burning out, needing to move, needing to separate and start a whole new thing, came to Michigan going, how do we build community? How do we build a safe space for ourselves? What type of structures around our life do we need to make? And boundaries. And then what do I do for a living? I wasn't even certain I was going to go straight into fundraising again. Really wasn't sure when we moved here. And so that was an interesting phase of life.
Yeah. Yeah, we have bends in our road, and if we can learn from those bends and apply the knowledge, we're so richer for it. The last question is, where's your favorite place on earth to disconnect and recharge?
Great question. The outdoors, nature. So that's taken different shapes in life. Before 2020, I got outdoors and started running and enjoyed long relay runs, doing like adventure races.
Yeah.
And then after kind of the kids started growing up, it turned into hiking in the woods. And more recently, my storage partner's taken me on just some river fishing where we go fishing for trout and wander around through these streams in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And just loved how it's just so peaceful. I haven't found
Yeah.
anything more peaceful than that.
Outdoors, in nature, around the water often, if you can, certainly in the woods too. Great places to be. Well, John, what a delight to have you on the podcast. I appreciate the fact that you brought so many real life practical experiences into the fundraising world in the sense of all the opportunities you've been in, and then just some business perspectives in light of things that you do. So you've really added value to the fundraising world. So grateful for that. And why don't you just take some time right now and let people know what ways can they connect with you if they want to explore anything further?
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thanks for that opportunity. Biggest way is reach out. LinkedIn is kind of my favorite social media type space to be. I think because of the business professional space that it provides. But on LinkedIn, it's J Roberts one, or if you type in John JR Roberts, the JR usually is what pulls me up. That's a great place to connect. Love to chat anything fundraising, community, even business related or family stuff. I think those are things that are just important in life. And how do we create balance, especially when you're someone like me who has a little bit of ADHD, a little bit of squirrel syndrome of wanting to try different things, and you have
Yeah.
curiosity to look into it. So I love those conversations.
Yeah. I love your focus on curiosity. That's very enriching. Well, just want to thank our guests for taking in the podcast today, our listeners. And this is Funding Your Future Now podcast. My name is Dr. Randy Dirks. You can find these podcasts regularly on Spotify and on YouTube. And just want to invite you to come back in the future and also check out me on my website at randydirks.com. Thanks again for joining us.